Katie and I are indeed truly happy to be here, to see all of you, to hear your voices, to hear Martha's wonderful music. It's as wonderful as ever, and to say that I am personally honored to be allowed to speak from your pulpit. The opening words are by May Sarton. Come out of the dark earth, here where the minerals glow in their stone cells, deeper than seed or birth. Come into the pure air above all heaviness of storm and cloud to this light-possessed atmosphere. Come into, out of, under the earth, the wave, the air. Love touches everywhere with primeval candor. We light our flaming chalice to illuminate the world we seek. In the search for truth, may we be just. In the search for justice, may we be loving. In loving, may we find peace. All of us need recognition. It is crucial to human flourishing. We need it from those who love us, who love us, and we also need it from the state itself. With recognition, we matter as human beings. 20 years ago, Billy Collins was the nation's poet laureate. I had the good fortune to listen to him recite his own poetry once live. The poem this morning is The Lanyard. The Lanyard. It shows us so magnificently how recognition need not always be the one-way street we expect. The other day I was ricocheting slowly off the blue walls of this room, moving as if underwater from typewriter to piano, from bookshelf to an envelope lying on the floor, when I found myself in the L section of a dictionary where my eyes fell upon the word lanyard. No cookie nibbled by a French novelist could send one into the past more suddenly. A past where I sat at a workbench at a camp by a deep Adirondack lake, learning how to braid long, thin plastic strips into a lanyard, a gift from my mother. I had never seen anyone use a lanyard, or wear one if that's what you did with them, but that did not keep me from crossing strand over strand again and again until I had made a boxy red and white lanyard for my mother. She gave me life and milk from her breasts, and I gave her a lanyard. She nursed me in many a sick room, lifted spoons of medicine to my lips, laid cold face cloths on my forehead, and then led me out into the airy light and taught me to walk and swim. And I, in turn, presented her with a lanyard. Here are thousands of meals, she said, and here's clothing and a good education, and here is your lanyard, I replied, which I made with a little help from a counselor. Here is a breathing body and a beating heart, strong legs, bones and teeth, and 2 clear eyes to read the world, she whispered. And here, I said, is the lanyard I made at camp. And here, I wish to say to her now, is a smaller gift. Not the warm truth that you can never repay your mother, but the rueful admission that when she took the 2-tone lanyard from my hand, I was as sure as a boy could be that this useless, worthless thing I wove out of boredom would be enough to make us even. That's Billy Collins. When I heard him in person, I had the notion, actually, Katie and I bought the CD. We listened to it in the car, and I had the idea after a while that I could read it in his voice. So if you could tell the difference, it was Billy in person. Okay. Please join me now for a few moments of silent meditation. In the name of that which each of us holds as of ultimate concern, let us be reminded to reach out to others, and in speaking to them, to honor their presence, their personhood, their potential, and their problems. And in turn, to kindle the kind of mutuality that finds new friends and fashions lasting fellowship. Amen. Amen. The question that I will work over today is, what is the source of human good? As in some scary movie, the answer is perhaps closer at hand than you might think. Marcia would go if I talked to her. We would have dum. Let me start my story at the beginning. Imagine that you're the only person on earth and have always been. Imagine there's no loneliness because you've never worked up the idea of another person. Wonder while you're imagining if commitment and loyalty and love could exist, if you could even conceive of them, for there would be no possibility for a human relationship. When I wrote that, I thought of apologizing for relationships with animals. But today, let's focus on the human side. And finally, ask what your sense of good might be. Ask if your sense of it would be limited solely to the personal comfort of being momentarily sheltered and fed. Indeed, ask if even the concept of beauty, if it could occur to you, would likely encompass nothing more than that kind of personal comfort, limited as it is. I imagine we already sense intuitively that our values are derived today from our relations with other people. Morality springs from our deep pasts as members of small tribes where loyalty was essential to the group's survival. So our tendencies to helpfulness and constancy would be rewarded. You could sit nearer the fire, nearer the food, and further from the wolves. The birth of values begins. And I thought then, to a footnote, would say, yes, perhaps also jealousy and envy. But let's focus on the good values, the human good values. There are, of course, strong leaders to protect the tribe and some who prefer their personal comfort arranged by others and soon become warriors and then royalty. And some deem themselves beyond the need for reciprocal kindness, but can instead simply demand what they want. For they are, they say, different from us, divine and divinely inspired. And he said, and in turn, they enlist priestly interlocutors to explain the rules to us lesser. Here's the truth. See if you can live with it. It was the birth of power-driven, top-down religion. I don't mean to sound too unforgiving here, but those, it'd be cool if you could smile through these masks. You get it. If it was funny, you'd get a better sense of it coming, you know. But I recall once a large billboard, one I passed office, depicting a newborn child. And the copy above it said, "God has a plan for you, come find out what it is." Followed by the church's address. And if you accept there's a preordained plan, off you go, looking to God for the answer. After all, how else can you weather the inexplicable forces pummeling your life? After all, there's the devil and there are the other people. So the one source to trust, the one said to be good, must have the answer. It's the will to believe is born. It really is tough to imagine that we've got the answers on our own, that we can build from the bottom up, that we can say, these are our values. Here's where they lead us. Here are the models we create with them for our governance and conduct. But I believe we've got the answers, and I believe the process to reach them is knowable. One of my favorite theologians, Gordon Kaufman, wrote a book called God the Problem. The title says a lot. In it, Kaufman introduces what he said elsewhere, which is that God language has its roots in humans' concrete secular experience. He doesn't quibble with its use. It's genuinely valuable to many. But he goes on to say whether God language is true or not is another question. To be clear, this is not Kaufman's, nor is it my effort to disprove or prove the existence of God. Most people, in fact, have a concept of God in their minds, a concept. Kaufman's concern skips over these concepts to focus instead on what he calls the reality of God. Whatever the reality of God, he says, whatever it is a mystery, and thus discussions about the real God are beyond knowability. There can only be theorizing. And so we are left to ourselves when we seek to explain what's good, what's moral, and how we should conduct ourselves. Faith, some say, gives us the answers. But beware of the circularity here of then facing the next question: where did your conclusions come from, the ones you base your faith on? I venture that most who believe in God would say they do so on faith. The doubt about the knowability of God is thus the birth of faith. I believe in my faith, and my faith leads me to God. I recall another billboard, this one identifying a nearby church and touting the upcoming sermon. Is there a God? Find out what he's like on Sunday. The ad reminds me of a seminar I took in divinity school, taught by Gordon Kaufman, on the subject, what can we know about God? And at its end, there was a long silence at the end of the entire semester, which I took for deep respect for the semester's work. And then students began to see that the answer to the name of the seminar, what can we know about God, was nothing. One student objected, arguing that all her time had been wasted, that if there was nothing more than history and sociology and psychology as an answer, the divinity school itself was a waste of time. All the relevant courses, including Kaufman's, could have been taken in the undergraduate yard. Now, I don't mean to sound too tough, either on God or on Kaufman or on the worth of divinity school, but keep this in mind. Students choose which particular school of theology or seminary or divinity they will attend. And each of them introduces the students to a different concept of God. So you might ask, which school will actually vouch for a concept of God that describes, in fact, the real God? If you would like to know, who would you ask? Who would they ask? Thinking you've got the answer can lead to a sense of security or to stagnation. Ta-da! More drum roll. That's all right. We usually had this worked out in advance. But I got here late. It's not Martha, believe me. Passivity. This is perhaps the stagnation point. Passivity was the hallmark of the Puritan theologies, the ones who founded my divinity school in 1636. They believed you were born a chosen saint, bound to go to heaven regardless how you lived, or you were not, doomed no matter how you lived. And so they spent their lives waiting. Not waiting until they were 70 by any means, or even 76, I might add. But waiting for a sign of chosenness, waiting for the afterlife of glory if they were among the lucky. The early Unitarians forsook this passivity, raising their aspirations above all this useless introspection. And in time, some of them became known as transcendentalists. Emerson's Oversoul, which is in the hymnal 531, makes this point explicit. Part of his Oversoul says this: within us is the soul of the whole, the wise silence, the universal beauty to which every part and particle is related, the eternal one. When it breaks through our intellect, it is genius. When it breathes through our will, it is virtue. When it flows through our affections, it is love. Here was something more intimate, more present, more immediate. Here was what was called immanence. God was in everything, in the mountains, in the birds, in the people. This was a naturalist theology, much like that many indigenous peoples, much like the Hindus, and it gave us a role on center stage as repositories, as representatives of the divine. It gave it to us. And in the offing, it opened the door to a clear call to social action. The divine was there in others and in nature. We could care for it, so let's do it. It was the Unitarians' tikkun olam, the call to repair the world every day. We could see all our work, all our social action. We could see the very process that our wills had created. And looking at that process, looking at the work itself, we said then that it was divine. And this was the birth of process theology, espoused most formally in the early 20th century by many great thinkers, including Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead, and also by a Unitarian minister. In 1946, a University of Chicago theologian, Henry Wyman, his name is not spelled like it should be spelled. It's W-I-E-M-A-N. So for you Northern Europeans, you'd think it was Demon. But in any event, it's W-I-E-M-A-N, Henry Wyman. He published a book entitled The Source of Human Good. For its time, it was an audacious title. This is 1946. The war had ended, and now the world had seen the horrors of the death camps. The question on most lips was, is humankind inherently evil? To imagine instead, as he did, that there was human good, let alone to aspire to say where it came from, was a brave position to take. And some thought it was foolhardy. He was born in 1884, so by the time 1946, he was in his early 60s. He'd begun his life as a Presbyterian minister and then gone on to teaching, landing most significantly at the University of Chicago in 1926. Later in his life, he was ordained as a Unitarian minister and taught at two divinity schools that are predominantly Unitarian. Starr King at the University of California in Berkeley, and Bill Lombard on the University of Chicago campus. He died in 1975, just short of his 91st birthday. To get to what he said, he saw that if you ask the question, is there a God? The mere asking of the question itself presupposes that the questioner has already formed in her mind, has already assumed, as it were, the concept of God has truth in it. If you ask, is there a Coke in the fridge? You know of what you ask. You've seen one before. Wyman refused to indulge this presupposition. He saw that the word God should refer to whatever it is that operates in this world to transform people, to make them better people, to make them more moral, to improve their lives and the lives of all around them. Whatever this is, whatever it is that saves people, is for Wyman actuality of God. It is the real God, as opposed to the concept. In a sense, he is now back to that solitary self I mentioned that you might imagine at the beginning of my talk today, wandering around alone in the earth. This was the beginning of Wyman's search for the source of human good. It was an empirical, fact-based one for whatever it is in our lives that has so much character and power that will transform humans in a way that you can't transform yourself. A naturalistic theology is what he found. This is sort of the nutshell of it. He said that God is what happens in our lives when we make a connection by communicating with another person, when the meaning that we communicate is like integrated into our life and theirs, when our ability to understand and appreciate the world and others is thereby deepened and enhanced, and when all the persons affected in the communication share in an increased sense of community. He was very determined to use the form of the verb to be, the indicative form. God is what happens. So I guess we're back to his idea of process theology. This creative event among these people communicating with each other is itself God. People can become better people, his argument goes, but they can't do it alone. The kind of communication that does transform us is created by others, and it transforms us in ways that we could not accomplish alone. We experience this transformation, we experience this creative event, and in this process, we create God. Humans make God happen. So here he is putting some clothes on Kaufman's mystery. Looking back, there was something truly inspired by Wyman's timing. The world needed a dose of encouragement about humans and what they're like in 1946. The cold winds of war had blown away a lot of the systematic classical structure of pre-war religion. And the cold winds kept blowing too from what were then called relativists and postmodernists and existentialists. The world's people needed someone who, like a clown, could show them what they were really like inside. And they would do it. Maybe Wyman's timing was inspired because he thought about all these things, perhaps. But maybe too, Wyman was interested in giving humans something to lean on, something to weather the cold winds blowing from Europe, something to restore a semblance of faith in a post-Hitler world. Regardless whether his theology leaned too much on the assumption that if something was there to transform us, that it must be God, because it couldn't simply be something coming up out of ourselves alone. We couldn't just reach inside and make a change for the better. And it is true that his 1946 has in fact been looked at like this. He wrote it, he said, to help us feel about ourselves, to transform us, to save us, regardless of what theologians thought of his theology. I suggest one final viewpoint, one that Wyman perhaps did not see. It is that he himself, with his own concern for saving us, for commending us to look inside, communicate with others, was in fact being the first and most convincing exhibit of his own theory, the one that says humans participate in making God happy. I like this viewpoint a lot. I like it because it's optimistic. I like it because it comports with what I see in the world. I see a lot of dedicated people who do not publish their own theology or offer any ready answer to why church, yet who act in such a way as to transform those around them. These people are the saviors. It's the reason for fellowship. And I have a very confirmed belief that it's at the heart of this congregation.